Hey guys, back with another video here. I just wanted to take you guys through one of my favorite aggro decks coming into the new format. It has a lot of different decisions that you can make, plays pretty similarly to decks that I've liked in the past, and has a lot of really cool elements building wise that you can tool around with. So I'm going to show you guys my Water Ochaco 4 deck profile.
Owes me money!
He made me provide excellent service!
Kids, he made me experience high tide! Oh!
Alright, so here's the list. For our character, Ochaco 4. We're playing on water. Our character doesn't really have any defensive abilities, but on offense it is incredibly potent. Being able to choose between 3 speed or 3 damage, depending on what attack that you have, is very strong. Re-readying every time one of your attacks hits is also insane for playing strings. And you'll notice with the cost curve of this deck, we are just a string deck, and we are quite good at it. Our first attack is going to be Falling Heel Strike. We play 4 of it. This card, very good for reusing our resources, very good for reflipping so that Ochaco has more food to give stats to her next attacks. Stun doesn't hurt. A lot of our attacks in our deck, with the exception of Chimera Kraken, are on 4s just because we're playing 2 checks, so we want to bring the cost curve of our entire deck down in that regard, so checking a 2 is less awful, at least early on in our strings. Late in the string, it's still devastating, but Falling Heel Strike unflipping our utility cards is very strong, and then in conjunction with Ochaco's once per turn unflip, it just lets you reuse resources that you normally wouldn't be able to. Falling Skies, no brainer. 4 of card was made for this character. We're high attacks tribal, so this attack later in strings just gets an insane amount of stats. It's copies 5, 6, 7, and 8 of a throw in our deck if we need it to be. And it's a charge for stuff like Flustered. Battle Aura Release, another charge, another just insane card. It's card draw at the cost of another face-up foundation in our stage, so sometimes you have to make the trade-off on stats versus card advantage, but it scales with our face-downs in stage, so oftentimes Ochaco is sending this as a 7 high 8, because we'll always have like 4 face downs, and you don't need to give more damage to this move unless you're trying to kill your opponent and you've sussed out that they don't have a high block. So this one's usually hitting your opponent for 8, and more than likely drawing you a card while it's doing so. Jawjammer in this deck is always going to deal a minimum 6 damage. It's a throw, blows up your face downs, which is great for putting zeros back in your discard to build with Tasty Riff if you don't have applause counters, or just like letting you reuse any of your face down foundation's abilities with Tasty Riff later in a string if you have the applause counters to rebuild them. And on top of that, it's just a very high damage move. It's going to be for 11 if you are able to use both Ochaco and its own ability. So that's 6 damage on a partial because it's a throw. Very strong attack. Tasty Riff is kind of the backbone of this deck. Tasty Riff wears stats incredibly well. Has so many different pieces of card text, and is kind of one of our only real deadlock pieces in the deck. So we have that going for us. It's also very insane card draw, like helps you build out while you're stringing, which is like the hallmark of aggro characters that are unfair. And 8 high for 3 is really hard to block when Ochaco puts stats on it. Vast Hybrid is really good right now in this format. There's a lot of insane assets that you want to be freezing. There's a lot of really good defensive pieces on foundations that you can, if you turn off at the start of your string with Vast Hybrid, like allow you to play a lot more confidently into things. Shutting off stuff like Keiko's Aid in our string deck is always really important. And then the momentum ability is nothing to sneeze at either. Putting speed on something for free means that Ochaco can put damage on something that you normally would want to hit and put speed on. And all around it's just like a very solid card. Good block mod as well. One asset in the main board, we have Ein. Ein in this deck kind of just says that we are a 7-hander instead of a 6-hander. And then sometimes when you're playing a long enough game and you're playing into someone's defense, if you don't need the card draw aspect of it, you can use it to hand tax them. It's worth having in as a one of. It's oftentimes the side out for a lot of our stuff that we're bringing in post board, but for game 1, having that option to just like be a 7-hander in your aggro character is pretty sick. One of our only super defensive pieces in the deck is Referee Jury. On these symbols, this card is insane. You're going to be seeing a lot of that this format. Jury really helps out because, as I said, our character doesn't have any defensive abilities on face, and by virtue of being an aggro deck that likes to string and we keep our cost curve low, a lot of our defensive resources are like incidental speed hate or, you know, modular effects for like small outcomes. So having Referee Jury as like a, hey, big reset, like I'm taking 4 from this and that's fine because we have 28 health to soak with. Pretty solid there. Moving on to our foundations, we start with a spam. This deck is playing 2 checks, right? So our cost curve has to be pretty low, and our amount of spam has to be high, especially in conjunction with Tasty Rift being able to build zeros with without any applause counters. So we play 4 Syndicate target. Having 6 checks to offset 2 checks is good, and also it's just like a spam with a solid block modifier. Basic training, one of our really good deadlock abilities, also helps to add stats to stuff that we're going to be putting speed on with Ochaco. So just like makes our attacks a little bit more well-rounded, and you can like tool around with it if you don't have any other good like reusable flip abilities on your board. You can go like first attack, respond basic for damage, flip it to give speed, play your second attack, respond unflip basic training, respond basic training for damage. Surviving the final, like I said, incidental speed hate on spam, pretty solidly what we're looking for in this deck. More incidental speed hate on spam is fast friendship. This card in this deck is almost always -3 speed, so it's just Fei with a different block mod. And there's just like no real better defensive piece in this deck than this because it's like no cost functionally -3 speed, and you can reset it because it's a flip cost if you need to. For Flustered, this card in this deck is insane. Unflipping it once per turn with Ochaco in conjunction with our like fleet of charge attacks that we play is very sick. Unflipping it with Falling Heel Strike sometimes turns your character from a 6-hander into a 9-hander. And it's just like insane at stealing momentum against decks that are trying to hoard it to use for defensive resources or to use for the crackback on offense if you don't need the card draw. 2 Return of the Kings, another incidental speed hate card. It's something that we can use our momentum on. We do have a couple of momentum outlets that are pretty sick. But having Return of the Kings be like a buildable block in a format where people are playing a bunch of Walk the Dogs and stuff, we'll wind up ending our turn if we play a little bit more conservatively with a lot of foundations up just because Ochaco can re-ready them. So Return of the Kings is like viable in that regard. Struggling with Studies at a 3 of, incredibly strong in conjunction with Referee Jury on like longer attack strings, and just in general good spam. Quick Response at a 2 of. This card adding speed to our attacks means that Ochaco can freely add more damage. Also, it's an insane deadlock effect. But as I said, with like bringing the cost curve down, we don't play that many 2 diffs, but this one is worth playing 2 of for sure. Problem solving at a 2 of. It is sometimes important against like Mop Strike decks if you get lucky and they hit this instead of something else. Mostly it's there as like a decent block mod spam that has anti-stun on it. It also combos in conjunction with Fearless Frog sometimes, but Fearless Frog is in here as a like one of many cool 1 of or 2 of tech pieces that is buildable after your first Tasty Riff hits. We're high attacks tribal, right? There's Showdowns running around, Airy Smiles running around, a bunch of other stuff that like we don't want to be attacking high all the time if we know our opponent has something like that. And Fearless Frog being something that we can once per turn pitch something, make it a low, flip it with our character on the next attack, and then the third attack play another one and have it be low again. Really good at like reusing once per turn resources in this character by managing your flips and unflips. Ice Gliding at a 2 of, more incidental speed hate on spam. Hungry for Fame in this deck. Shoutouts Andrew Holder for the suggestion. Originally this was leaving the Bebop, but Hungry for Fame committing and flipping doesn't matter as much in our character because we can re-ready the face down foundation after one of our attacks hits, and then play our second attack and unflip Hungry for Fame. So it winds up turning your strings that start with 1 attack into strings that end up with like 3 or 4 attacks because we play 8 throws, so we'll always have something to fetch with Hungry for Fame that can re-ready it when it hits, so we can get 2 momentum back per turn with Hungry for Fame generally, and that's just insane value. Building it off of Tasty Riff feels akin to building UA high and like re-grabbing a Tasty Riff in the Coda decks. You're just like daisy chaining attacks together for free off of your like effects on character and just incidentally because your attacks do that type of stuff. Weapon Clash, very, very strong in this deck. Um, Building face down foundations and then unflipping it turns your like safe 2 to 3 builds in this character because you're playing around your 2 checks into if you resolve 2 attacks on turn 2, 5 to 6 build. It's also a way to get rid of our face down foundations if we are like nervous about going into deadlock against younger Toguro, and it's incidental minus damage that doesn't super cost us anything because we can use it to flip and rebuild and then unflip it with our character. The last one is Failed Role Model. This card really good against like decks that have 2 critical like reusable defensive foundations on strings. And against string decks in general, that's like where you want to be if you're trying to live. So we are aiming to stop that. Very plus side in our deck is the fact that it's a flip cost because that means that we can unflip it with our character and with Falling Heel Strike, and you can potentially seal up to 3 of your opponent's foundations on an attack string off of just 1 failed role model being in play. For the sideboard, most of this is pretty solid. The thing that I'm currently testing is Hero's Upbringing, and I'm testing it for younger Toguro specifically because a lot of our block mods aren't amazing, and we don't have the best defensive resources, bar Referee, Jury, and our Speed Hate. So a lot of our time that we are trying to live through opposing string decks is mostly just leveraging 28 health and trying to block like 1 to 2 things. Hero's Upbringing really helps in that regard. Because if our opponent keeps using Younger Toguro, we can turn off the damage pump, and then they have to just kill us with a raw like amount of attacks in a row, and that's a lot harder to do without like free damage on your face. But as far as the solid things in this deck go, we have Team Doctor at a 2 of. Very important, like I said, for those decks that are using stuff like Showdown, that are using stuff that can like stop our strings. Having 2 Team Doctors that are buildable after you hit like 1 tasty riff if you've checked them, or just in general you can build them and this deck sees a lot of cards, is very solid. Broken Psyche is another way that we can utilize our momentum, and we get a lot of momentum just because we can give a bunch of speed to our attacks, and even if they aren't hitting for much damage, we can use that for Broken Psyches. Broken Psyches being a flip cost is also insane because we can reuse it. Faith Shield at a 2 of, obviously very strong against throw decks in the format and against decks that want to be doing like echo stuff or combo decks. Really helps to offset that. And then 2 copies of Eden's Box, just a really solid like defensive resource that's reusable for some reason because it's a commit cost. A little weak, both of these are into like Vast Hybrids and I guess just like Amajiki cards in general because the asset hate on those symbols is really good, as well as against Hacker, but you'll know when you can and can't bring these in, and also against specifically Hacker Extraordinaire, when they turn into foundations, Ochaco can unflip them and then they become assets again, so you have that cool utility as a way to reuse them if you make it through the turn. But that's the list. Let me know how you guys like it. This link is going to be public. I do not have the thing turned on private, so you can view this and any decks that I make for videos in the future on my account, Mitchell Cimino on UVS Ultra. And I hope you guys like the list. Have a good day, and I hope to see you guys in Vegas.